I thought I found my dream mentor at my new tech job. Turns out my VP boss was systematically stealing my ideas, isolating me, and presenting my work as his own. Here's how I use digital evidence to expose him and reclaim my career that I'm 25. And for the last 6 months, I've been living what I thought was the dream. Fresh out of a good marketing program, I landed a junior manager role at Innovate Solutions, a tech company that's been making waves for its rapid growth and seemingly endless stream of innovative ideas. I moved across the country for this, leaving behind a comfortable but stagnant hometown, eager to dive into a place where talent and hard work were supposed to be rewarded. And for a while it felt like that. The energy in the office was intoxicating. People were young, driven, and seemed genuinely excited about what they were building. My first few weeks were a whirlwind of onboarding, trying to absorb mountains of information and figuring out where I fit in. I was eager to learn, to contribute, to prove I wasn't just another entry-level hire. That's when Richard entered my professional orbit. He's the VP of Digital Marketing, a man who commands attention the moment he walks into a room. He's 42 but carries himself with the energy of someone 20 years younger, dressed sharp, always ready with a witty remark or a profound-sounding insight. He's got this reputation as a visionary, the guy who steered the company's entire digital strategy through its hypergrowth phase. A month into my role, Richard called me into his office. I walked in, heart pounding a little, expecting a review of my first few tasks. Instead, he offered me his full mentorship. "Chloe," he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that felt both friendly and assessing, "I've been watching you. You've got that spark, that raw drive. You remind me of myself when I was starting out." He paused, letting the compliment hang in the air. "I want to help you harness that. Make sure you're focused on the right things. Avoid the early career pitfalls I stumbled into." My chest swelled. This was it, the kind of mentorship I'd only read about. I eagerly accepted, and suddenly my days were intertwined with Richard's. He'd pull me into strategy meetings usually reserved for senior staff, ask for my unfiltered thoughts on campaign proposals, and then spend hours dissecting my ideas with me one-on-one after most people had gone home. He called it intensive development. I called it the highlight of my week. He insisted that for me to truly grasp his vision, we needed to work closely, away from the noise of other departments. "People get jealous, Chloe," he'd tell me. His voice lowered conspiratorially. "They see potential and they try to either squash it or take credit. We need to build your confidence in a protected space first." So I found myself spending less time integrating with my immediate team and more time holed up in Richard's spacious corner office, or on calls with him late into the evening. The first subtle shifts began to appear like hairline fractures in glass. Richard would praise my initial concepts in front of others, but he'd always add, "And I helped Chloe refine it, of course. That little tweak there? That's the key." Or, "Chloe came up with a great starting point, and we took it from there to really make it shine." My contributions would be acknowledged, but always as a preamble to his own expertise. Felt strange, like a talented artist being shown at a gallery, but only as a footnote in the main exhibition. Then came the requests. "Chloe, can you send me all your analytics reports from the Q2 campaign? I want to draft the quarterly review myself. Make sure it highlights your early wins properly." Or, "Could you send me the full presentation deck for the new product launch to my personal email? The corporate system sometimes glitches when transferring large files, and I don't want you to lose any of that great work." Each request felt justifiable on its own. He was my mentor, after all, looking out for me. But the sheer volume, the insistence on using personal channels, it started to feel less like mentorship and more like information gathering. I began to notice my name appearing less in team meeting agendas, my direct contributions on new initiatives being subtly downplayed or attributed to the marketing department's strategy rather than my specific ideas. Colleagues who I'd shared coffee with, who'd expressed excitement about my initial pitches, started giving me guarded looks. One junior designer, Leo, pulled me aside once. "Hey, Chloe," he'd whispered, fidgeting with his laptop cable. "Just a heads up. Your ideas for the Connect campaign? They're killer. Just make sure they get out there under your name. You know?" He trailed off, looking nervous, and hurried away before I could ask what he meant. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. Maybe I was just being insecure, projecting my own anxieties about being new and unproven onto Richard's genuine efforts to guide me. He was so confident, so articulate. He always had the right words, the explanations that made sense. If he took my raw ideas and polished them, wasn't that what mentors were supposed to do? Wasn't that how you learn to climb the ladder? I told myself I was being ungrateful, that this was part of the process, that I just needed to be more resilient, more like him. But the feeling persisted, a low hum of unease beneath the surface of my professional enthusiasm. It was in the way he'd steer conversations back to his own past successes, the way my meticulously crafted campaign briefs would reappear in presentations, subtly altered and presented as his own evolving concepts, with my name sometimes tacked on as a footnote. I was starting to feel less like a rising star, and more like a ghostwriter for someone else's success story. The last straw, the one that made me sit here typing this at 1 a.m. instead of sleeping, was when Richard asked me to compile a detailed retrospective of my first 6 months. Every campaign I'd touched, every insight I'd had, every challenge I'd overcome. He wanted it all in one Word document, to formulate a personal development plan for your next year. As I was finishing, I noticed my laptop screen had mysteriously switched to a different browser window, one with Richard's personal Google Drive open. And there, in a folder labeled Chloe_projects, were subfolders for each campaign I'd worked on, containing not just the final versions, but all my rough drafts, my early research, even my brainstorming notes. It was everything I'd ever shared with him, meticulously organized, as if preparing it for something. I closed his browser window quickly, my hands trembling. The idealism was starting to shatter, and I was left staring at a growing suspicion that felt too dark to acknowledge, too real to ignore. That discovery in Richard's Google Drive, my own work meticulously organized in folders labeled with my name, was the moment the fragile hope I'd clung to shattered. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a deliberate collection. He wasn't mentoring me, he was cataloging my output. The realization hit me with the cold weight of betrayal, instantly eclipsing my admiration and replacing it with a chilling unease. I couldn't unsee it. The carefully constructed image of my brilliant, supportive mentor began to warp into something far more sinister. I started replaying every conversation, every request, every time he'd lauded my raw ideas before presenting them himself with minor tweaks. Leo's warning, "Make sure they get out there under your name," echoed in my mind. My days transformed into a quiet, internal investigation. I became hyper-aware of every interaction, every email, every shared document. When Richard asked me to send over the final analytics for the Q3 campaign, the one where my core strategy had been presented by him as his own breakthrough, I felt a surge of something cold and hard in my gut. Instead of just sending the report, I made a copy, added my own notes detailing the origin of each key insight, and then through a secure, anonymous upload service, sent it to a personal encrypted cloud storage I'd set up. It felt like a small act of defiance, like leaving a digital breadcrumb trail only I would follow. Richard continued his pattern. He'd pull me into his office for brainstorming sessions that felt more like interrogations. "So, Chloe, what are you thinking about the new social media push? I need the raw, unfiltered stuff. Don't worry about structuring it, that's my job." He'd then proceed to extract every thought, every nascent idea, meticulously typing notes into his own proprietary CRM software, which he often bragged about as being state-of-the-art for talent management. Sometimes during these sessions he'd receive calls or texts and his expression would subtly shift, becoming distant or overly casual. He'd excuse himself for a moment, claiming a personal emergency or a confidential client call, leaving me to wait in his office, the hum of the city outside a stark contrast to the silence within. He also started isolating me from my colleagues more assertively. When I mentioned wanting to collaborate with Leo on some design elements for the new campaign, Richard brushed it aside. "Leo's a great guy, but his focus is on visual execution. Your vision is strategic, Chloe. It needs to be pure, unadulterated. Stick with me. We'll translate your brilliance together." I started feeling like I was in a bubble, my work seen only through Richard's filter. My initial enthusiasm waned, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The confirmation came not with a bang but a whisper. We were working on a pitch for a major new client. I'd spent weeks on market research, user personas, and a multi-phase digital rollout strategy that I was incredibly proud of. I'd poured everything into it, sharing the evolving drafts with Richard as always. At the final internal pitch meeting, where Richard presented the strategy to the executive team, my heart sank. He presented my core ideas as his own, articulating them with his usual flair, but my name was only mentioned once in passing. Chloe provided some initial research that helped shape this. The wave of recognition I'd craved felt impossibly distant, replaced by a sickening wave of injustice. After the meeting, I confided in Leo. He'd seen the presentation too. He looked concerned. Chloe, that was all your concept. He barely changed anything. It's messed up. He hesitated, then added, Look, I don't know what's going on, but some of the seniors are talking. They noticed how much of your work goes through Richard before it's officially presented. He offered me a contact at the company's internal ethics hotline, but I felt too uncertain, too afraid of being wrong and damaging my reputation even further. Instead, I decided to take a more direct, albeit subtle, approach. I started creating a more robust backup of my own work, diligently saving every version of every file, not just in my company drive but on a personal encrypted USB. I started a private journal meticulously logging every request, every meeting, every instance of misplaced credit or suspicious behavior, including the precise times and dates. Then I decided to test Richard. I accidentally left a small, almost invisible watermark embedded in a PDF of my next market analysis. A very specific, slightly obscure symbol. I wanted to see if it would appear in his presentation, or if he'd remove it, or if he'd even notice. A few days later, he asked me to send him the report for final review. When it arrived in my inbox, he had indeed removed the watermark from the main document, but had forgotten to do so on a hidden metadata layer within one of the embedded images. The symbol was there, my silent signature, a flag planted in his stolen ground. That was it. The final piece of the puzzle that solidified my fear into certainty. This wasn't mentorship. This was theft. My ideas, my work, my potential, all being mined and packaged for his own advancement. The admiration I'd felt had curdled into a bitter mix of anger, disappointment, and a deep, gnawing sense of being utterly exploited. I realized I couldn't just endure this. I had to protect myself and my career. The thought of confronting Richard directly terrified me. He was powerful, respected, and I was just a junior. But the thought of letting him continue, of letting my own ambition be systematically dismantled, was worse. I decided to start compiling everything, building a case, not for revenge but for myself. It was time to stop being the naive mentee and start being the analyst of my own professional sabotage. Update 1. The watermark discovery was less an aha moment and more a cold confirmation. When I saw that little symbol embedded in the metadata of the PDF Richard had finalized, a symbol only I knew was there, my silent digital fingerprint, the last vestiges of doubt evaporated. It wasn't just my ideas he was repackaging. He was systematically cataloging and then appropriating them, treating my creativity like inventory for his personal gain. The admiration I'd felt, the belief that I was on the fast track thanks to a genuine mentor, curdled into something bitter and sickening. I doubled down on my evidence gathering, transforming from a worried junior employee into a reluctant investigator. Every request from Richard became an opportunity. When he asked me to compile a retrospective of my first 6 months, detailing every campaign, insight, and challenge, I didn't just send him a Word document. I created a master file on my personal encrypted cloud drive. I saved every draft, every email exchange, every Slack message, and then meticulously organized them by project, adding timestamped notes about our conversations. I even started subtly tracking his movements around the office using public calendars and overheard snippets, cross-referencing them with the times he'd ask for my work to be backed up or reviewed offline. Richard's requests for my work became more frequent and more demanding. He'd insist I email him sensitive customer data or strategy outlines directly to his personal Gmail, citing corporate system glitches. "You can't be too careful with proprietary information, Chloe," he'd say, his gaze unwavering. Better safe than sorry. Each time I'd comply, but I'd also email myself the exact same files from my work account, preserving the chain of command and the proof that I was following company protocols. I even started saving my chat logs from company-sanctioned platforms, just in case. The office grapevine, usually a harmless buzz of gossip, started to pick up a more sinister tune. Leo, the designer who had subtly warned me before, became my informal confidant. He'd seen Richard present my Q3 campaign ideas, almost verbatim, at a senior leadership meeting. "It was your concept, Chloe," he said, looking genuinely troubled. "He just changed the delivery. And everyone's raving about his brilliance." Leo also mentioned that Richard had been talking to him about design changes for my upcoming campaign, giving Leo directions that directly contradicted what I'd planned. "He said he was refining your vision, but it felt like he was rewriting it entirely," Leo explained, shaking his head. I started discreetly researching data recovery and file forensics. My IT background helped, giving me a basic understanding of file metadata and version histories. I learned how to check creation and modification dates, author details, and edit histories, often finding that Richard's final versions were compiled from my own documents, sometimes hours after he'd supposedly helped me refine them. I even managed, through a bit of careful observation of his screen when he stepped away during one of our strategy sessions, to see a snippet of his personal cloud storage. Amongst folders like holiday pics and personal finance, there was one labeled Innovate Chloe's Q. It was terrifyingly organized. The psychological toll was immense. I started waking up at 3 a.m., my mind racing through every interaction, every piece of evidence, trying to construct a timeline that made sense. Was I being paranoid? Was I misinterpreting everything? Richard's charisma was a powerful weapon. It was so easy to believe his version of reality, to doubt my own perceptions. He'd compliment me publicly for my diligent research, while subtly taking credit for the strategy itself. He'd praise my dedication for working late, then use that same dedication to claim I was overwhelmed and needed his guidance to stay on track. It was a masterclass in subtle manipulation, designed to make me feel dependent and inadequate. One day, Richard asked me to consolidate all my project files for the Q3 campaign, marketing plans, budget allocations, competitor analysis, even my personal brainstorm notes, into a single PDF. He said he wanted to use it as a case study for new hires on how to approach a complex brief. I felt a prickle of alarm. This was too much. My entire process, my raw thoughts, my evolving strategies, all being packaged by him for his own narrative. Instead of just sending it, I meticulously compiled the document, but I also embedded a small, almost invisible digital watermark in the header of each page. A unique, tiny symbol that only I would recognize. Then, I saved it to my personal encrypted drive and only after that, emailed it to Richard from my work account. He wouldn't be able to trace it back to a personal source, but if it reappeared anywhere without my explicit permission or without the watermark, I'd know. A few days later, I saw my Q3 campaign strategy being discussed in a management meeting. Richard presented it as a phenomenal success, highlighting his own role in its development. And there, on the slide detailing key performance indicators, was a small, almost imperceptible mark in the corner. My watermark. It was a quiet, solitary confirmation, and it solidified my resolve. I couldn't go to HR blindly, not without concrete proof. They'd likely dismiss it as office politics or my own insecurity. But with Leo's cautious corroboration, the watermark, the documented requests for my proprietary data, and the sheer volume of evidence I was compiling, I knew I had something tangible. I decided to reach out to a former professor who now worked in tech ethics and IP law, a contact I'd made during university. I needed advice on how to proceed, what kind of digital evidence was admissible, and how to protect myself before I made a move. The game had changed. It wasn't about learning anymore, it was about survival. Final update. It's been almost 6 months since I sat across from Richard, armed with my meticulously organized digital evidence, and laid out the sheer extent of his professional plagiarism. The meeting with HR and legal was exactly as draining and surreal as I'd imagined. Richard, caught off guard but still attempting to maintain his composure, initially tried to dismiss it all as creative differences or misunderstandings about project ownership. He suggested I was overly sensitive, that my raw concepts needed his experienced hand to truly succeed. But when I presented the file logs, the creation dates, the watermark, and the chat histories that painted a clear picture of his deliberate appropriation and isolation tactics, his facade crumbled. He couldn't explain away the digital trail. His attempts to cast me as a disgruntled junior employee backfired spectacularly when faced with objective timestamp data. The company, wanting to avoid a messy investigation and potential lawsuit, conducted a swift internal review. The outcome was predictable. Richard was terminated with cause, escorted out of the building by security that same afternoon. The official reason given was policy violations regarding intellectual property and professional conduct. The immediate aftermath at work was a strange mix of shock and relief. Some colleagues who had silently witnessed Richard's behavior approached me with quiet nods of support. Leo, my designer ally, gave me a thumbs up across the office, a silent acknowledgement of our shared understanding. My direct manager, Sarah, who had been so hesitant to believe me initially, was visibly shaken but appreciative of my methodical approach. She assured me that my own career prospects were not only intact but, ironically, bolstered by my handling of the situation, though the recognition came with a heavy dose of caution. I received a promotion a few months later, a small victory that felt hollowed out by the circumstances that led to it. However, the win felt more like a scar than a medal. The experience changed me. The wide-eyed idealism I'd walked in to innovate solutions with was replaced by a healthy skepticism. I learned that charisma can be a mask, and that the most dangerous wolves often wear the most flattering suits. I became fiercely protective of my ideas and my processes, always backing up my work in multiple secure locations, meticulously documenting every significant interaction. My trust in people, especially those in positions of authority, was fundamentally altered. I learned that mentorship, when genuine, empowers; when predatory, it exploits. The biggest takeaway wasn't about office politics or digital forensics, though. It was about self-reliance and understanding my own resilience. I discovered a strength in myself I hadn't known I possessed: the ability to stay rational under immense pressure, to trust my own observations when the world tried to tell me I was wrong. I also learned the importance of finding allies, even unlikely ones like Leo, and the power of having a trusted external advisor like my former professor. I still work at Innovate Solutions. I've moved on to new projects, found my footing, and am building my reputation on my own merit, with my own name attached to my work. But the thrill has been replaced by a quiet, professional diligence. I'm good at my job and I'm respected, but the naive excitement is gone. I no longer look for a charismatic leader to guide me. I focus on building solid relationships with peers and understanding the objective metrics of success. The experience left me with a lingering sense of vigilance. I'm more careful now, more observant. I no longer view every request for my work as a sign of trust, but as something that needs its own layers of verification. It's a less trusting world, perhaps, but also a more secure one for me. Richard disappeared from the tech scene entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he was quietly fired from a subsequent role for similar indiscretions. It's not the grand public humiliation I might have fantasized about in my darkest moments, but it's a quiet erasure, a professional consequence that feels fitting. My career is on track, but my perspective is forever altered. I learned that sometimes the biggest battles are fought not with grand pronouncements, but with quiet documentation and unyielding resolve. The idealistic junior marketer is gone, replaced by someone who understands the darker corners of ambition and the critical importance of protecting one's own intellectual and professional integrity. It's a lesson learned at a significant cost, but one that has, paradoxically, made me stronger and clearer about who I am and what I'm capable of.